Alright, hi everybody. This is just an answer to some of the questions I had about the modification I did on the vacuum control solenoid. Alright, so I'm not going to spend any time on this, but this is, you could pause this and take a look. This is the simple stock configuration. I put the vacuum pump here. There's a line that goes to the ECU control turbo controller right there, and that simply controls the wastegate diaphragm. Right, so that's it. I'm not going to get into that anymore. But my modification, and you can see I have my little copyright symbol up here. The vacuum pump still in the same place. Still these lines come over. What I simply did was, and I'm going to show you on the truck, I put two T's in the little in the vacuum lines. I put one here, and then I put one right next to it, which you'll see in the truck is really right in the same location. Then I put ran a line into the cab, and I ran a cab-mounted ball valve. What is needed, and we could talk about this in a minute, is this relief valve, and I'll show you what I'm talking about, because it's just a weird thing. It creates like some kind of a little a vacuum no man's land. It's like there's like a little vacuum trap when you use the check valve. So, and I'm a mechanic. I'm not an engineer or a physicist, but I do understand those things, so I have an idea of what's happening there. But the best method in order to control the vacuum and the turbo perfectly is to put this check valve right in line on the turbo side. Alright, not on the vacuum pump side. Alright, so let's take a look inside. Alright, here's simply what I did. Alright, I just mounted this little ball valve, simple piece of junk from Home Depot, even with plastic quarter-inch lines, so it's really, there's nothing to it. Alright, and I just ran those back into the truck, into the engine compartment, and right here is where you would need that blow-off valve, and I'll explain it in a minute. So, simply, under the hood, and I made this kind of raggedy looking so that you could see what's happening here. Alright, right there is the vacuum. This is the ECU control unit. Alright, this is the turbo controller, and here's the little rubber grommet. The tan vacuum line is the one that runs from the pump. Okay? So that's always vacuum at all times. And the way you could tell is, and one of the reasons that got me into this whole thing was this little sucker is going bad. So I wanted turbo, so what I did was I just unplugged it and just simply turned this thing around so it was on full bleed. It's on full bleed off. It's a fail-safe, so that when there is no vacuum, there is no turbo. So I put it to full vacuum for full turbo, and that was the video I made before. So right here is where you would put the check valve. Alright? So what you want to do is have it so that it can vacuum on one side, but no vacuum on the other. But what happens is when this, and that's assuming that this thing would be closed, but what happens is the computer is still working, and it's still going to be doing its thing regardless of what you're doing inside the cab. So it doesn't know that you're modifying. So the best thing to do is put that check valve in there and put a bleed off on the other side, and then you have full control. What happens here is you don't have full control, because then the controller is still doing a bleed off when it feels like it needs to do a bleed off, and you may be wanting full turbo. So you won't get full turbo, and I don't really need it. That's why I took it out, because I rarely need 14 psi. I don't care. It's not a big deal to me. If I want a little bit more boost, then I throw my ball valve. But let me explain to you what I want to tell you. An ideal ball valve, or an ideal blow-off valve, is like this little thing on an air compressor. So if you have a broken air compressor, or you can get a part, this thing works under pressure, so it would be ideal for a vacuum situation. And simply what you do, when you're driving, you'll notice that the vacuum, there's this funny thing that happens. You know, you lose your turbo while it's on full. You may have, you turn it off, and then you have no turbo, and then what happens is If you just bleed off that little bleed valve right here, your turbo comes back on. It's phenomenal. It's kind of weird. I really can't explain it any other way, but that's the only thing I noticed, a little weird thing happening. Alright, so we have two T's. One here, one here. These go into the cab for the ball valve. That's the modification. Everything else is still in its place. I could take this all out and just plug it right back in and sell the truck as is. And of course, this is where the gauge is going. Alright, I hope that explains. If there's any other questions, just send them. Thanks.